Now, depending where the assets are held, that also determines what we have to do to creditors, what our duty is to creditors. So that topic's come up quite a bit, hasn't it, Will, in the last kind of few weeks?
Yeah, definitely. So we get that call a lot where people will call and say, hey, these creditors are asking for my deceased parents' bills to be paid, and then what do we tell them?
It's the attorney answer, huh? Depends.
Yeah.
It always depends. So what's the difference? So what if we have to do a probate? What kind of notice do we have to give to creditors versus if all the assets are in the trust? What type of notice do creditors get?
Yeah, so when we do a probate, that triggers this 4-month period where we have to give notice to all the creditors. And then they have, isn't it 4 months where they need to make a claim on that? So they need
right. So as part of probate, you have to give notice to creditors. You have to post in the newspaper. So the way we give notice, creditors, they call them known creditors. If we know about them, you have to send them a letter and send them notice that way. For any unknown creditors, you publish in the newspaper. And we do that every time as part of a probate. It's required. Yep. So that's how unknown creditors get notice. Then you have a duty to satisfy their claims. Let's talk about that. One of my favorite things to do is I like negotiating with creditors. I find it enjoyable. The probate statutes say that the creditors have to be satisfied. That doesn't mean paid in full. As part of our services, we'll help people negotiate their claims against the creditors. Now, for real estate, it's usually what we call a secured creditor. They have a mortgage on the property. If they're not paid, they have the right to foreclose on the property. So those are a lot different than unsecured creditors like credit cards. So if there's a credit card debt in the name of the deceased, that's an unsecured creditor. We do have to give them notice, but if we're trying to if we're trying to get any assets out of the estate, whether that's through a probate, or even if we do what I call a mini probate, if it's less than the value where we can do a real property affidavit, you still have to satisfy the creditors as part of that process. If all the assets are inside of a trust, what type of notice has to be given, Will?
Yeah, none, really. It's kind of handled outside. So the trustee has a duty to distribute to your beneficiaries, but not to give notice to anyone.
Right. So assets inside of a trust, that's another advantage of avoiding probate. So you hear bad things about probate, that it's time consuming, and part of it, the other bad thing too, is that you have to go to all the creditors and you have to make sure they're satisfied. Versus if all the assets are in the trust, we've seen this a lot lately, and where people have engaged us, they've hired us so they can get our advice. If the assets are inside of the trust and there's things like credit cards, we advise them how to handle those. And usually it's they don't have to pay them, or they can do a significant discount to pay them off.